So Charlie, we're picking up mid-stride here, but one of the things I wanted to point out is that the Democrats were kind of poised to be the, because the Republicans seem to have failed in preventing the Great Depression, the Democrats are poised to pick up all kinds of electoral support. And what I wanted you to pay attention to is what an interesting amalgam it is. When I talked about political parties unifying us, look who's unified here. I've got, the Southerners, that was the kind of in the historic DNA of the Democratic Party, especially like the working class Southerners that are, dependent on agriculture as their kind of basis. So when you think about the Agricultural Adjustment Act and a lot of the things that help protect farmers, you were mentioning the Dust Bowl a second ago. So there's a lot of programs that are helping Southern farmers, right, in the agrarian interest. But the party bosses and the party machines had picked up a lot of the urban working class poor, right? And we've got a lot of programs that are helping put people to work in the cities as well. So you take that coalition and what we've got in there is union members, but we've got the new ethnic groups, including African Americans, including Catholics, including Jews. What they have in common often is their economic conditions, but then you've got what George Wallace will later call pointy-headed intellectuals, but you've got these, kind of liberal intellectuals that are folded in as well, partly because of their philosophical beliefs about the role of government, and the party holds them all together. Republicans, again, by default, are the, looking at, this is demand side, this is supply side, this is Keynesian economics, this is trickle-down economics. This is fix the economy by having less regulation and tax breaks for kind of corporations and trying to stimulate, business growth by business-friendly kind of policies. So that's how the two kind of parties evolved. Would we say we're in a six-party system? Well, you guys studied federalism, right? What did every president kind of from Nixon on try to do, the conservative presidents? What were they trying to return? Power to the states, right? Did they succeed? So that's why I guess there's a question mark there, that there's this renewed effort that kind of continually happens, but with little little discernible ability to see how successful they were.
Clinton kind of tried that, right? He was a new Democrat.
Well, that one of his famous lines is the era of big government is over, and the question is, did the Republican sweep force him to kind of be that new kind of Democrat, where he had to get ahead of things? Welfare reform is going to happen one way or another without him, so might as well help try to put your stamp on it and take some credit for it, or be victimized by it. Same thing with Nixon. Did he really was he a pro-environmentalist, or did he know the EPA and the environmental movement was going to happen one way or another and get ahead of it, right? And at least make it more state-oriented. So one of the things that I wanted you guys to kind of notice, actually, as I kind of click back, is, one of the things that you see in our system is it's not consistent, but, Republicans, Democrat, Republicans, and then really starting here, what's the trend? Whether it's one term or two.
Democrat, Republican.
We alternate, right? We go kind of, Republican, Democrat, and then Trump, Republican, right? So we do have this history of going back and forth. And we see also within Congress this, kind of sea changes. You had the Republican sweep in '94. There's talk of the blue wave. There was a series of special elections that happened yesterday, and 2 more seats flipped to the Democrats in what were thought to be, Trump had won these places by pretty wide margins. So we do seem to have a trend, and you can kind of use it to diagnose where we are politically, of alternating who controls power. Sometimes we do it simultaneously. So there is this phenomena, again, of divided government that seems to be something we do deliberately. What does that mean? And in fact, let me show you how important it is. You'll deal with these a little bit more in detail later. Here you go, Charlie.
Are you asking why it happened?
No, I'm asking what is it? What is divided government?
It's when 2 different parties control a different branch of the government.
Okay, so I might have the Republicans control the White House and Democrats control Congress. That's one way to see it, right? Could I see it another way too?
You could do it like states level, different.
Good, because we're a federal system. What else?
Maybe Democrats control the Senate and Republicans control the House.
We have a bicameral legislature, so you might see it there.
You could actually have like
You could have all these things going
like
on
one
at the
party
same time.
controlling the bureaucracy.
Great. So the idea that there are appointments made, and these appointments, in many ways, represent a legacy of whoever made the appointments. They're going to be there long after that person is out of office. So you might see kind of, ideally with the bureaucracy, they're career bureaucrats that eventually become loyal to the job. But there's all this idea too: do they have partisan leanings, and do they kind of
Enforce how they
enforce
see it.
based on that? You could say the same thing of the courts, right? You know, they're supposed to be impartial and based on the law, but they obviously come in with a judicial philosophy that's based on their politics. So there's a lot of ways that you see divided government. Do you see why it's important? You know, here are 3 questions from 2001 on, all with the word divided government in them. So you need to be able to define it, and then we'll work a little bit more formally on those questions as we go.
So just a question, because like, you know, you talk about like the blue wave. So would this
Yeah.
be like a weird twist on the coattail effect where Trump
Yep.
rides into office and then he didn't drag a bunch of people up with him, he just dragged a bunch of people that aren't super with him down?
It in many ways, the midterm elections, no matter who's in office, is
It's just
typically
like
seen as
reverse
a
control.
referendum on who is in office.
Right.
And so, you know, if it is, the economy is doing well and people like the current administration, that person would campaign and you would get on his coattails and you would sail to re-election. If that person is unpopular and polarizing, you keep them in arm's distance because you're worried about the reverse coattail effect.
Right.
So in many ways, yes, this election is seen as a referendum on that. And you can read the tea leaves that way. So, all right, one of the things I wanted to point out is that we have this phenomenon of kind of switching back between parties, and often we'll do it kind of in almost a schizophrenic way. Like I want the executive branch this and the legislative branch that. Conventional wisdom says it leads to that. What is that? That's gridlock. That is me first, I don't care that the light is yellow, I'm getting out into that intersection so I can get all the way across. But when the light changes, no one can go anywhere. Everyone's trapped, okay? Conventional wisdom says that divided government leads to gridlock. However, if you look at the kind of the metrics of government getting things done, the metrics don't move that much when it's the same party, you know, controlling both branches, and different parties controlling different branches. So in other words, the percentage of legislation that passes, the number of appointments that are approved of, the number of investigations, the number of vetoes, they all stay consistent, regardless of whether it's Republican and Democrat controlling different houses or same party. Why? Because on some level, you have to get things done. You know, being the party of opposition gets you only so far. So there is incentive to compromise and still get things done. However, if I drilled down to the next level and I looked at, well, what kind of legislation gets passed? When was the veto used? If I look at it qualitatively, you might see some differences. I guess that's what I'm suggesting. Yeah.
So what would happen if like one party controlled the executive branch, like 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House? Would theoretically more stuff get like done?
You need 60 again. The whole magic number is 60 in the Senate, right? That's, would more things get done? Probably. But what I will tell you is the trend is they got health care through, right? And they did it largely not on a bipartisan, well, I mean Obamacare.
Oh, okay,
Right?
they meant Trump.
You had Democratic control of the White House, the House, and the Senate. And they used their numbers to get Obamacare through with not a lot of Republican buy-in. So what happens when the Republicans come in?
They undo it.
They undo it, right? It takes a while, as long as it takes to, you know, ravel something up, it takes the same amount of time to unravel it. But, you know, when we move away from the politics of compromise, everything is temporal, if that makes sense. You know, you're building things of sand. So here's the other thing I want to stress, because you saw those 3 questions on it. divided government may not completely make us ineffectual. Things still get done. What is the larger danger, and another term that you keep seeing pop up, is party polarization. That really is rendering us largely kind of ineffective and impotent. What do I mean by party polarization?
Both parties are so stuck in their ideological places that they refuse to collaborate.
And if I were to swing the camera on you, you're doing it with your hands,
Yeah,
right?
they're just completely.
So they're in the
Opposite,
poles,
yeah.
right? They've come away from the center and they've gone to the ideological extremes. And that really is seen as, one of the greater dangers. That may be one of the greater threats to us currently. So, all right. Where are we then? I often kind of advocate that we have more in common than we have different, but I think sometimes we forget, right? Are we completely polarized, or are we still a purple nation? Well, there's different ways to look at it, I guess. You can look at remember I said we kind of, go back and forth. That's what that chart is showing you. That, that's a 10-year span, and they do it in 2-year chunks. And you kind of see, okay, Democrats are in charge of the White House, wait, it goes to Republicans, Democrats, Republicans, you see that back and forth. And you see some trading back and forth in the House and the Senate. What you see while we're trading it off is a kind of an ideological consistency, right? Are those numbers really moving in terms of Republican and Democratic identification and independent identification? Okay, so we do seem to, have some ideological consistency, but it still results in a willingness to flip control of institutions back and forth. Again, if I looked at degree of victory and, shaded places more intensely red or blue, based on the margin of victory, and kind of, the purplish color is where it was closer, maybe we're a nation of purple. Again, this is a different way to see kind of political identification, that Democrats are 29%, Republicans are 26% of self-identifiers, and 42% lean, but they lean pretty consistently. Here's another way to see it by margin of victory. That might be a little more easily to kind of like, the taller the line, the greater the kind of margin of victory. Where do you think the blue lines are coming from?
Big cities.
Big cities, hence, the big kind of scale there. I can do it as dots too, by the way. The bigger the bubble, the bigger the margin of victory. And there's some big victories out there, but by and large, there's a lot of little dots and kind of no dots, right?
No one ever gets the info for Alaska. Just can't be done.
Yeah, I know it's a red state, but the problem is
There's just
that
never any.
I didn't notice that.
Alaska's, like, their capital city only has like 30,000 people in it, which is like a big city, but like not compared to any other city on like
The mainland.
Juneau, the capital of Alaska?
Yeah, it's like
I just asked it as a question. That's one of my favorite kind of
alright.
dad jokes. Do you know the?
Gina.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
That's in written record right there.
There it is.
Written
That's
record.
out there in the intertubes. All right. So.
That is also.
Let's kind of pivot now. Looking at the idea of like, okay, when are we dysfunctional? We've got gridlock and party polarization. Do we need to be concerned? Does this kind of paralyze us as a government? Do we need to maybe consider political reform? Because that's one of the themes on the test. Let's first look at, well, let's make an argument for the two-party system as dysfunctional as it is, hence my political cartoon. There are some arguments as to why we perpetuate it. And the first is kind of an institutional bias towards it, all right? One of the more complex terms, and in fact I added the word plurality to it because I've seen it that way on the test. I think your notes just identify it as single-member districts. But you may see it on like a standardized or AP test as single-member plurality districts. And what the heck is that? Well, again, understand that elections happen on all different levels. For all different kinds of offices, and sometimes we exclusively focus on the presidency, but for Congress, what we have is single, and state representation too, single member plurality districts, meaning what is a plurality?
More than the rest.
More than the rest. Whoever gets a plurality of the vote gets how many of the seats?
100%.
100%. So if I win a district or a state with a plurality, I get all the votes. What other systems do is a more proportional representation system. So You know, it might look a little like this, where you go in and you vote party, and I know it's fuzzy, I was having trouble kind of doing some of the technical stuff, but there's 5 names listed in most of these cases. So if I win 10% of the vote, I get 10% of the seats, and we kind of go in order of candidates listed there. So that's a more proportional system. Now, why would it ever matter getting 10% of the seats? Well, the idea is that makes you a power broker on some level. Again, we need 60 votes in the Senate to kind of get anything done, and rarely does the majority have 60 votes. This would give them somebody to reach out to broker that deal. That is maybe not their ideological opposite, and things get done that way, right?
So what you're saying is it brings parties closer together by forcing them to work together so they have more of the seats.
They, let me think about how you just said that.
So essentially, like, you have 2 parties, one has 20%, the other has 20%.
Yep.
And if they're coming together and working on something that they want to pass, something that they can both agree on, then
Right.
they essentially have more political power.
Yeah, so in other words, they get political power when they find areas of agreement, ways that compromise and working together is the way that they're gonna have an impact on policy. That's a good way of putting it. So, you know, that is how other systems do it. The problem is, how often can you get these coalition governments to line up? As quickly as they often form, they collapse. And then they have the expense and the agitation of new elections, although they do it a lot cleaner than we do sometimes.
I know that.
Yep. So kind of keep in mind that this is the alternative, right? One of the things to look at though is, you know, yes, this is a way that third parties can become brokers, but they can also impact the rules of elections. Are we ever going to get a third party kind of candidate to control any kind of state, local, national office? Well, then can they affect the rules about getting on the ballot, about getting financing, about districting, about, you know, any rules, when voter identification or whatever it is? They don't get to affect the rules, okay? That's separate. That is one institutional way. These single member plurality districts explain why we have a 2-party system. Because it essentially keeps third parties out of the game and they can't influence the rules. It's separate from the winner-take-all system. Because really when I'm looking at single-member plurality districts, it's a way that they're kind of not having an impact on the state and local level, right? Here it's keeping them out of national level, and in particular, where does the winner-take-all system apply to? What kind of election? What are they never gonna hold? Which office are they never gonna hold because of this system? Americans close. Where? The executive, right? The presidency. When you look at a third party, you know, essentially what you're saying is, does the principle matter more than the practical side of it? Like, I'm voting for this person knowing that they're never going to win, but I'm doing it as a statement. I want them to get some numbers because, again, one way or another your vote counts. It either adds to a mandate or it takes away. But I don't think anybody ever voting for a third party thinks they got a chance, right? So it's often seen as throwing your vote away. I mean, there's some, we're gonna look at it, and we'll probably get to it more so tomorrow. There are some notable exceptions, like what are some of the more powerful third party success stories out there that you know of? Who do you know?
Teddy Roosevelt.
So the Bull Moose Party is the most successful in that. Not only does it get I think it's 27% of the vote, and it gets a significant number. It's more, I think it's like 88, something like that, electoral votes.
Right.
But still, you know, Wilson wins in a landslide. I mentioned a Southerner. He's kind of maybe the second best example. He's maybe, it depends on how you count it. He gets more popular votes than this guy, but he's going to get 19% of the vote.
And no electoral votes.
I mean, look at it on the map. 19% of the popular vote. 0 electoral votes.
George Wallace.
George Wallace, who's running as a Dixiecrat. There's a Southern party that really is, we're going to look at it more in detail. And he also captures a high percentage of, relatively high, he's like second most in terms of electoral votes. He gets less, this guy gets more popular vote, but no electoral votes. Who would you say is the most impactful though? As like the smallest kind of, you know, what was one of the most impactful ones?
I say this wrong. Is it Eugene Debs?
You know, you could look at him as the progressive and reformer. This is more a modern example. Like, he got like 4% of the vote, 0 electoral votes, but man, did he affect the election.
Gary Johnson.
Oh wait,
What was it?
it was for the 2000 election.
Yeah.
I forget his
Forrest,
name.
He took like 2 million.
You're gonna learn them, because you gotta, on our long block, you're gonna do a little research on them.
That's why like Al Gore lost.
Ralph
the vote.
Nader.
Oh.
I had him right up there, Ralph Nader, right? And in part I'm saying he's most impactful because,
He took the votes away from Gore.
and did he take the votes away, or were those his? And that's kind of a funny way of looking at it, right? That this person had legitimate issues and a legitimate base, but he was seen as a spoiler. Like you ruined the election for Gore, as opposed to he had a legitimate position there. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? So again, the single member plurality districts and then the winner-take-all system are two institutional factors that essentially keep third parties out in the cold. Plus, whether it's elections or governing, there's a disincentive for voters and for candidates to be part of a third party. It means you're not going to get elected, and then you don't have any governing power if you did get elected, right? You would become politically impotent. The way that you get things done is you come to the center. You don't go to the fringes of a third party, right? Hence, it's a magical unicorn party. What else? Well, I'm going to say this with a straight face. We have a kind of culture that supports moderation and compromise. Said it with a straight face. You see that? It may not seem like it, because man, we've got some divisive issues that we, whether it's on gun control or abortion or gender equity or same-sex rights and things like that. We get obviously very intense. But I taught you the French Revolution, right? There's political extremes. I mean, they had the Reign of Terror and Robespierre. So,
And they killed Robespierre.
if you would look at other, yeah, exactly. If you look at other systems, you're going to see maybe more political extremism. We do have this tendency to moderation, to kind of being in the middle, right? And you do see it largely, like I said, reflected in the numbers that show you political identity and the way we go back and forth between the parties. So I would say there's a cultural kind of tendency to, we get uncomfortable largely when people think differently, and our instinct is to let's talk this out, and let's figure out why we want to kind of come to common ground and middle ground. I do think that that's part of our basic kind of culture and DNA. And then the last factor is once you have a party, a kind of identification, it becomes perpetual, right? It is something that simply is passed on generation to generation. A lot of you guys did your political identification activity, and you kind of discovered, oh, here's reasons why I am the way I am, Because prior to that, you kind of accepted it as, your label, who you are. And then it typically gets reinforced. It's that chicken and egg syndrome that I talked about. The party will support policies that are unique to that demographic. That demographic will support the party because of it. The party will continue to pass policies supportive of that demographic, right? So your idea is passed down generation to generation, and then the parties essentially pass policy that is beneficial to you, that perpetuates your support, okay? So that having been said, that's why we're a two-party system. Let's make a case for why we maybe need third parties, right? Even though I forget her name.
Regina George.
Regina George is saying it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls, one of the best movies, right? So
Watch the wrong one.
they're all good.
Mean Girls.
They're all good. All right, let me get this out here. So, why do third parties matter? Well, can you see a danger if we're always in the middle? It seems like a good thing, kind of inherently. Hey, we're always kind of agreeing.
There's no change though.
There's no change. And are there occasionally issues that come up that demand change? I don't know, where you stand on the environmental issues, whether you think it's a global warming is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, or whether you're concerned. But that is an issue that maybe, I don't know, maybe that the Green Party, third parties might do a better job of kind of making us wrestle with that issue and bringing some attention to it. So occasionally there's an issue that the public has said demands attention, and it's not being picked up by either party. Gun control is one that we're wrestling with right now. The parties do have a different approach to it, but I don't know, maybe You want a more ideological extreme kind of, absolute protection of guns versus more restrictive limits, and you'd move to a third party on either ideological extreme because of that issue. So this is what causes them to kind of appear, but the problem is they typically are single issue groups, right? And then how do you govern if you're a single issue group? How do you build a coalition? What you invariably do is what you were talking about, which is drawing votes away from other groups simply by kind of playing a game of chicken. Now, I hope this is a foreign, I found that like the game of chicken was something unique to kind of 50s, I don't know what to call that genre, the kind of James Dean type movies here where greasers and yeah, you have a lot of emphasis on car culture and
What was it, Outsiders? Is that?
yeah, Pony Boy and Golden
Yeah.
Boy. And
Yep.
so this is a game of chicken, and this is essentially what happens between third party and the regular party. Nader's in one car, Gore's in the other. And the question is, who's gonna bail out first? Will Gore accept Nader's kind of platform and policies? Or will Nader bail out because he thinks I may cost Gore the election? Or are they both gonna go off the cliff? There's a lot of combing of hair and cigarettes as an affect.
Which I've always closed so you don't die all the way.
I always thought chicken was when you drove directly at.
That's one form of it. I didn't find the video that had that.
All right.
So they're just gonna head for a cliff. I don't know how they peel out on dirt, but. Yeah. What are the odds?
Oh,
Oh, no.
All right, so he's chicken, and he's dead.
oh no.
So,
Oh.
yeah, I feel grateful for that you got the internet and other kinds of, because otherwise this was your entertainment. This was a good movie.
My friends and I used to do that on bikes.
Uh,
We'd do
Off
that,
cliff?
Play chicken.
like ride
Play
at
chicken.
each other and see who would like.
So this is the idea, and we're going to start to look at it more with third parties tomorrow. Okay, is the role of the third party to kind of bring up that issue that we need to address and basically point their car at the other party and just like come hell or high water, not cut the wheel to force the other side to adopt the issue. Or are they playing the role of spoiler, where essentially they just kind of cause, they drain votes invariably from one party more so than the other and cost them the election? So tomorrow's kind of fun because we'll look at, the four notable third-party kind of success stories, more or less. And there's fun campaign videos and real or not.
That's real.
I would like to say it's real.
If anybody was
It's
going to
not
ride a
like
bull moose across a raging stream, it would be Teddy Roosevelt,
I mean, I
right?
can believe it. It's not like the Loch Ness Monster. Mooses are real, and Teddy Roosevelt was real.
He's real. Would it be docile enough to let him ride? Fake, photoshopped.
Aw.
And it has a lot to do with the
Yeah.
reflection
Yeah.
here where the leg goes in, right? So we'll start to look at the bull moose party. Look at again, he's in green. Okay, 16% of the vote.
We won California.
Or 16% of the electoral vote, I mean,
Pretty
and
good.
then 27% of the popular vote. Actually flipped a lot of states. No electoral success though.
He blew Taft out of the water.
Yep. You know, who was ironically his hand-picked successor, right? That he got frustrated with. Taft was literally told that no Supreme Court for you, you're gonna be the next person to run for office.
And
okay?
Taft went up with the Supreme Court anyway.
Right, and eventually creates the permanent home for it. He's the one that spearheads that, okay? Am I mistiming? I got time.
You have to take a
We'd
minute.
be like 10 seconds.
Good, I'm mixing up the clock, I'm expecting the bell to ring, so just read in preview. Do you know why he's called the leader of the Bull Moose?
Because like during his speech, he got shot. He stepped like.
Had a 55-page speech in his pocket, and I don't know how it fit there, and he gets shot, and it partially blocks the bullet, and he gave the speech.
Yeah.
Gave the
I
speech.
know he took out a rag and checked to make sure he wasn't bleeding at the mouth, got me internal bleeding, and he's like, I'm all set.
Yeah.
It was-
So he basically said, I have the strength and vigor of a, it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.